vamos a empezar hoy con esta idea de los webinars. Vamos a recibir a Sarah Wade, que es Outreach and Engagement Coordinator de la Alianza para la Custodia del Agua, Alliance for Water Stewardship, en inglés. Sara está encargada de los aspectos también del relacionamiento internacional de la asociación y de la promoción de la asociación, y hemos tenido varias charlas muy fructíferas en los últimos días, de donde surgió la posibilidad de hacer este seminario. Esperamos que a partir de esto internamente logremos disparar un proceso, digamos, creativo que nos permita aprovechar esta oportunidad que brinda la Alianza. Personalmente, a través de lo que Sara me estuvo contando, me parece que es sumamente interesante para nosotros como centro el involucrarnos en esta movida. Me parece que para las empresas del centro puede ser una excelente forma de visibilizar sobre todo su compromiso con el cuidado del agua dentro de sus respectivas plantas y también en el entorno, como Sara nos va a contar. Sara entiende bastante español, por lo que hemos podido descubrir. Todavía no se anima, eso será para el próximo webinar, así que va a ser en inglés, pero van a ver que es un gusto escucharla y muy fácil de entender. Así que los dejo con Sara. Las preguntas quedamos con ella de que las va a responder hacia el final. Así, de todas maneras, hay algún tema que es importante que pueda responder en línea, háganlo por el chat y ahí le avisamos a ella. Háganlo en español, igual vemos la forma de que llegue, se entienda, digamos. Bueno, en todo caso, al final nos vemos y seguimos interactuando. Hasta luego, y le dejo el paso a Sara.
Muchas gracias, Pablo. Hola a todos. Lo siento, pero necesitar hablar en inglés para esta presentación. Entonces, vamos a empezar. So, hi everybody. Great to speak to you all today. I'm going to give you a short overview of the Alliance for Water Stewardship, starting with an introduction to water stewardship as a concept. I'll then tell you a little bit more about the Alliance for Water Stewardship, which is the organisation that I work for. We'll then go into a bit more detail about the Alliance for Water Stewardship's Water Stewardship Standard. I'll give you a bit more information about the process that developed the standard and the benefits of using it and the different ways that it can be used. We'll then think about how water stewardship and the standard could relate to the work that you're already doing in Uruguay. And then we'll have some questions and answers and discussion at the end. So to start, a short introduction to the idea of water stewardship. But first of all, I think it's important to think about some context. We know that there is up to a 40% gap between water demand and water availability expected to be felt globally by 2030. We also know that around 80% of the world's wastewater currently returns to the environment without any treatment. We have nearly 2 billion people currently using a source of drinking water that is contaminated by feces. And currently, the cost of water insecurity to the global economy is estimated to be at around $500 billion annually. And it's not just the obvious water issues that are of concern to all of us. There are also the related impacts, just one of which.
Sarah, your camera is off. Can you turn it on?
Of course. Let me just swap and pop it back on. How's that? There we go. And all of these things obviously are contributing factors to some of the challenges we have around achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Particularly, of course, our interest, it being water, is around Goal 6. So when we talk about water stewardship, the foundation for a lot of this thinking and the reason for action comes from water risk. There are 3 types of water risk that we tend to talk about most commonly, and these will be really familiar to you all, I'm sure. So we can talk about physical water risk. This can be related to water quality issues such as flooding or drought, but also quality issues such as pollution or contamination. There's also reputational water risk, which is a big driver for action around water stewardship. And this is the risk of society beginning to associate a business or an organization or an individual's actions with negative impacts on water. And we've seen some clear examples of this through things like negative media attention directed at particular companies. And that tends to encourage them to take positive action as a result through a water stewardship approach. And the third risk that we tend to talk about most is regulatory water risk. And this is when...
Sarah, you are not sharing your presentation.
Let me just try again. It's being a bit temperamental. So there are the 3 types of water risk that we were just discussing. And the final one was regulatory water risk. So this is where water policy and governance is weak or not well implemented, or when water users are not adhering to the rules. All of these things can create regulatory water risk. And these are some of the contributing factors, but by no means all of them, as to why people might choose to take a water stewardship approach. And these are just some examples of some of the risks that we see. So there are your community reactions to problems. There are media reactions to water issues. We also see investors taking a greater interest in the risk that water poses to some of their investments. And we also see different types of regulatory reaction to water risks as well. And all of these different groups can be engaged in water stewardship in different ways to try and mitigate these risks. So now that we've got a bit of context and a bit more detail on the reasons why or the risks behind water, we can look at a definition of water stewardship to start to think about what that actually means in practice. Now, we're very lucky in that the Alliance for Water Stewardship, the organisation that I work for, we have a strong definition of water stewardship, and it tends to be the one that is used most commonly across other global stakeholders. This has been agreed upon by various organisations and companies, so you'll probably see this crop up in lots of different places. But we would say that water stewardship is the use of water that is socially equitable, environmentally sustainable, and economically beneficial, and that this water use is achieved through a stakeholder-inclusive process that involves both site and catchment level actions. And the reason why water stewardship covers more than just site level actions, or what you might call good water management, is that we all know that you can do everything yourself within your own boundaries of your site or your farm or your home to make sure that your water use is as good as possible. But if other people in your same catchment or watershed are not using water responsibly, they're not adhering to the rules or using best practice, then the work that you do could be lost because other people in the catchment could undo all of the good work that you're doing. So that's kind of a bit more about why we need to shift from just good good site level water management practice towards good water stewardship, which takes on board both actions at a site level, but also collective action with other stakeholders within your catchment and within your catchment context to make everyone's water use as sustainable as possible. So now that we've talked a bit about water stewardship as a concept, I'll introduce you a bit more to my organisation, the Alliance for Water Stewardship, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the standard that we run, which is the Alliance for Water Stewardship Standard. So the Alliance for Water Stewardship, or AWS, as we're more commonly known, is a diverse global alliance with a common goal. We have members from across global businesses, national businesses, small local businesses, but also from the public sector and from civil society as well. And our mission is to lead a global network that promotes responsible use of fresh water that is socially and economically beneficial and also environmentally sustainable. AWS is governed by a multi-stakeholder governance setup comprised of our members, and the very foundations of the work that we do also come from this multi-stakeholder approach. These are just some of our members. I'm sure you'll see organisations you know well represented here. Some of these organisations were founding members of AWS, so they were actually involved in setting up the organisation and developing the standard that we now are based around. And others are much newer members who have come into this more recently. AWS is a global network, but we are grounded very much in local expertise. So I work for AWS International. We work as the secretariat for the global system, and we act as the custodian of the AWS standard and its related processes, which I'll explain a bit more shortly. And then within our global network, we have a number of regional partners and local coordinators who support implementation and use of the AWS standard locally. So we have AWS North America, who are hosted by the Water Council in Milwaukee. There is AWS Asia Pacific, who were formerly the Australian Water Stewardship Partnership, and they are based out of Australia, but we have staff also based in Indonesia and in China, and their work covers a whole host of other countries as well, throughout the Mekong region, Australia, New Zealand, obviously, and a number of other places as well as the work develops. We're also working towards having a regional partner for AWS in Africa, and we hope to have that in place by 2019. And we are very keen to make sure that we also have a regional partner covering Latin America, and we would hope to have something in place by 2020. I should have said that AWS is a relatively young organization still. The work to set up the organization started maybe 10 years ago, but the standard that we are based around is only 4 years old. So we are very much still building the system and building the global network at the moment. We also have a network of trained service providers who, alongside our regional partners and local coordinators, support implementation of AWS globally. And I'll come back to that a bit more in a later section. So now I'll introduce you to the AWS standard. It's been a 10-year journey to get to where we are now. And this timeline kind of gives you a bit of an idea of where we've come from. So AWS, as I said, was founded in 2008. And between 2008 and 2011, the work really focused on building the organization and starting to think about how we create a global water stewardship standard to allow water users in any context, from any sector, to align themselves with internationally recognized best practice for good water stewardship. So in 2011, we formed the International Standard Development Committee, who I'll show you where they come from in the next slide, but it was comprised of representatives from all over the world, from different sectors, from different backgrounds and experiences, to help us develop a standard that is as robust and globally applicable as is possible. We then had 2 years of testing the draft standard throughout 2012 and 13, and in 2014, version 1 of the AWS standard was launched, and people started to be able to use the standard to assess their water stewardship activity and to plan their work going forward. Since 2014, we've undertaken a number of developments as an organisation where we've built our accreditation system, and that's the system that supports certification against the AWS standard, and I'll explain that in a bit more detail shortly. We also launched our AWS membership option because we are a global membership organisation. And in 2016, we had our first Global Water Stewardship Forum in Edinburgh. It is our annual event now that brings together the water stewardship community globally to share experience, knowledge, expertise, and to jointly overcome challenges around water stewardship globally. We also have a technical committee who oversee the development and management of the AWS standard. And at the moment, they are overseeing our first review of the AWS standard. And this is because we are a member of an organization called the ISEAL Alliance. And ISEAL is the global membership body for environmental and sustainability standards, and they set best practice for managing and running sustainability standards like ours and like others that you might be more familiar with. And they suggest at least a 5-yearly review of any standard that's used to make sure it's as current and fit for purpose as possible. So we are currently undergoing a review of the standard at the moment, and it will be complete towards the end of this year, which will mean that people can start to use version 2 of the standard. There won't be big changes, but there will be small changes and improvements made to help it be as useful and as easy to use as possible going forward. Throughout the last year, we've also seen a number of corporate commitments to using AWS for certification. Just one example of that is from Nestle. And Nestle Waters have committed to certifying all of their bottled water sites globally against the AWS standard. Some of our other members and businesses are using the standard in different ways, but we're seeing an increasing number of corporate commitments to use AWS and to certify against the AWS standard. And this slide just shows the International Standard Development Committee that I mentioned earlier. You'll be able to see we had representation from all over the world. And they played a really important role in developing the original AWS standard and helping to grow the organization going forward. So the AWS standard is free to download from our website. And at the moment, it is built around a 6-step process that contributes to 4 key outcomes. So the 6 steps you can see on the left of the screen there, they start with a commitment that's at a company or a corporate level to undertake a water stewardship approach. And from step 1, you move through a process of gathering and processing data to help you understand your catchment context and your own organization's water use. You then use this data and this information to develop a water stewardship plan. And as part of that, you will engage with other stakeholders in your catchment to make sure you understand other people's needs relating to the water that you will jointly rely on. This might help to identify common challenges that you could work together to overcome. And it also creates opportunities to find shared value in the resources that you rely on, and look for positive opportunities that might arise from taking a water stewardship approach. From step 3, once you have your water stewardship plan, you then move into an implementation phase. where you actually implement the actions that you've identified you need to undertake within your plan. And from there, you then evaluate your action against your water stewardship plan, and you then communicate and disclose the activity that you've undertaken, because it's really important that your stakeholders, whether that's at a catchment or a local or a national or even an international level, understand and know what it is you're doing around water stewardship. And this is an iterative process. It can be repeated. Things can be changed and moved around as you progress through the water stewardship actions. But as part of this process of 6 steps, you can be certified against the AWS standard. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail shortly. On the right of your screen, you'll see the 4 outcomes that implementing the AWS standard helps an organization to deliver against. These 4 outcomes are contributing to a sustainable water balance, supporting and maintaining good water quality within a catchment, protecting and enhancing healthy water-related areas within your catchment, and ensuring that there is good water governance in the catchment that you operate within or that you're based within. So a bit more about how the standard works. Well, as you go through the process of those 6 steps that I just mentioned, the standard helps a water user to consider a number of questions and then plan and react accordingly to improve your sustainability. So it might lead you to think about, who are the users upstream from me, and who are the people that can impact on the availability or the quality of the water that reaches me that I then need to use. But equally, you need to then think about the water users who are downstream from you and think about who you have an impact on. And your stakeholders aren't just limited to your upstream and your downstream users. There'll also be lots of other people with an interest in your water use and in the sustainability of your organization. Both your investors and your customers or your consumers might be an example of that, but there are lots of other people who would take an interest in this as well. As part of this process, once you know who your stakeholders are, upstream, downstream, and elsewhere, you come together with those stakeholders to consider your shared water challenges and to work together to identify a way to overcome those challenges. And through that process, it can help you identify your own internal business risks, but also the opportunities that might be presented by taking a water stewardship approach. And I'll talk about them a bit more when we come to the case studies shortly. So there are a number of benefits of applying the AWS standard, and I'll touch on just a couple of them now. The first is that it helps an organization, whether that's in the private sector or the public sector, to understand your water use in the context of your catchment. And we know that each time an organization uses the standard, they learn more about their local catchment context, but also their stakeholders and the opportunities that are being created through good water stewardship. And this helps to build internal capacity for sustainability through a stepwise learning framework, so through those 6 steps that I mentioned earlier. Another benefit of applying the standard is that it helps you to manage water risk at a site level, but also throughout your supply chain, which is often where some of the greater water risks might be found within your business. And we know that in some cases, applying the standard has helped different parts of a business to communicate and interact more with each other. So an example of this is perhaps the corporate headquarters of a business might choose to use the AWS standard, but in doing that, their sustainability team will have to speak much more often to their site manager or their teams on the ground. And applying the standard can really help build relationships across your company or your organization to make sure that that's as active as possible. Another benefit is that the standard helps you to engage effectively and build trust with your local stakeholders. If you are certified against the AWS standard, people can be confident that the work that you're doing on water stewardship is based on a robust, globally recognized framework for good water stewardship, which includes both positive water management and action outside of your own site or your own personal business. And this really helps to build on shared challenges and opportunities and develop strong relationships with your stakeholders. And the final benefit that I'll mention is that use of the AWS standard can help an organization demonstrate leadership in addressing some of those global water challenges that I mentioned earlier, but also in addressing some of your regional or national water challenges, because of course, water is so contextually specific to each of us that everyone has their own challenges within their catchment that they might be looking to overcome. So through joining as a member of AWS or by applying the AWS standard, a business can demonstrate its commitment to a system and a standard which has global recognition as best practice. I've mentioned that we have a whole system behind us which supports implementation of the AWS standard, and we've already talked about our regional partners, but we also have a global network of trained service providers who have undergone training to enable them to offer AWS services. So our AWS trainers can offer foundation, specialist, and advanced training in water stewardship and the AWS standard. Our AWS consultants can provide support and advice to organizations wishing to use the AWS standard, and they can work with organizations at any point in the certification process or through the use of the standard. But some businesses that are using the standard choose to use a trainer to train their own staff internally on the standard. And then rather than using a consultant to support them to implement the standard, they might choose to use their own internal staff to implement the standard. So it can be a good opportunity for upskilling your workforce. And this can also help keep the skills in-house and obviously then keep the costs of using the standard a bit lower than if you were to use an external consultant. And then the third type of service provider that we have is a conformity assessment body. And these are organizations who are qualified to assess whether an organization should achieve certification against the AWS standard. We have 3 levels of certification: core, gold, and platinum. And the auditors are able to check compliance against the criteria and the indicators that are built into the standard, and assess what level of certification should be awarded to an organization. So there is a whole network of support out there to help individuals, organizations, companies use the AWS standard for a range of different reasons and for different outcomes. We also are, as I've already mentioned, a membership-based organization, and our members benefit from a range of things, including access to our networks to get involved with new opportunities and to share global expertise in water stewardship. And we also do a lot of communication and marketing with our members. So we have strong communication channels on improving practice and recent innovations across the water stewardship community. And things like our annual Water Stewardship Forum is really run and developed by our membership. And it's a place where people can come to share experience and knowledge and expertise, but also to help each other overcome the challenges they may be facing around their water use. I also mentioned before that our governance is very much a multi-stakeholder process. So our board of trustees is made up of our members, as is our technical committee. So our members have a really strong say in the forward direction of AWS, and that's both the AWS system and the AWS standard. And in turn, they also then help support AWS through providing access to their own networks and insight from their own practice to help enrich and build the global understanding of water stewardship. We have about 120 or 130 members now globally, which has given us a really strong voice across a whole range of sectors in a variety of different places globally to make sure that we can all talk about a common approach to water stewardship and learn from the approaches that are being developed in other places. So what could water stewardship mean for you in Uruguay? Well, for the private sector, there are a number of different benefits to using a water stewardship approach or applying the AWS standard. At a site level, it can help improve efficiency of water use and strengthen your on-site management of water, which in turn helps mitigate some of those risks that we talked about earlier. It can help generate more skills for your staff and help build motivation. It can help you develop stronger relationships with your stakeholders, your customers, your suppliers, and that helps with both compliance and beyond compliance regulation. And it also provides you with a level of legitimacy through the third-party verification and that certification program. And it can help to build trust across your stakeholders and de-risk your business in terms of how the finance community might be viewing water risk. At a corporate level, that de-risking is really important, but it also helps to build your brand value. It can help also increase consumer trust. And using something like the AWS standard can really help a business to show leadership in tackling some of our shared water challenges globally. For the public sector, some of those benefits will also be there, but there are also some different ones. So at a policy level, using the AWS standard can help you to align with your policy objectives. It can reduce costs of assessing compliance if you know that someone is using a globally recognized standard of best practice. And through that improved stakeholder communication and strengthened relationships, it can also create a safe place for negotiation and some of those more difficult conversations that sometimes have to be had around water use. At a national level, it also obviously contributes to things like the SDGs and some of your other national plans around creating a nature-focused Uruguay. It also helps the public sector to engage with the private sector through driving innovation, through creating opportunities for conversation and collaboration. And it can really act as a catalyst for positive action, for collaboration, and for knowledge sharing. And all of these things contribute to sustainable long-term growth. Just to finish off, I'm going to take you through a couple of case studies of the different ways that the AWS standard has been used so far. There are many different ideas and stories I could tell you, but I've chosen 3 to try and demonstrate some of the different ways in which the standard has been used. So the first one is Peruvian asparagus farming. A few years ago in the UK and across the rest of Europe, the media picked up on the impact that European year-round demand for asparagus was having on groundwater in Peru. And there were media headlines around British love of asparagus, sucking Peru's Ica Valley dry. There was a real pressure on the retailers, on our supermarkets, to do something about this. So they decided, a few of them decided to use the AWS standard to collaborate and to improve the sustainability of Peru's asparagus industry. So we helped to create a multi-stakeholder partnership, which included the European retailers. It included major Peruvian growers of asparagus, as well as agricultural suppliers. There was involvement from the local government and academia in Peru, as well as international NGOs and the development finance community. And we all came together and we ran a series of trainings in the AWS standard for the asparagus industry in Peru, but with those other stakeholders involved as well. And the idea is that we have now created a small network of people based in Peru who have been trained in water stewardship, who are familiar with the criteria and the indicators that sit within the AWS standard. And as a result, they're able to implement a number of positive changes in the agricultural industry going forward. Some examples of this include things like improving on-site water management practices, but it's also helped improve trust between different actors within the catchment, which has helped to generate a collaborative approach to water governance and a collaborative approach to overcome some of those shared water challenges. And this program also helped to generate a stronger connection between European retailers who buy the asparagus and their suppliers in Peru, so that there's increased dialogue and a better understanding of the shared challenges that both are facing, and a stronger appetite to overcome these challenges and support each other to overcome these challenges. The next case study is a little bit closer to home for me. I live in Scotland, and this is one of our national health system up in the Scottish Highlands. And it's a very different approach to the Peruvian asparagus case study, but that's why I like it. So we have a hospital, Caithness General Hospital, who are right up in the northeast of Scotland. And they are aiming to become the first hospital in the world to certify against the AWS standard. And this is part of the NHS's wider commitment to sustainability and reducing the impact of the health industry. And they've recognised in this particular area that their community is hugely dependent on clean, reliable freshwater supplies. And that's because the two main industries in that part of Scotland are the whisky sector and tourism. And both of these industries obviously need our environment to be clean and healthy, and the water to be clean as well. And we know that the pharmaceutical industry globally has a serious impact on water quality. One of the main challenges is that a lot of the drugs that we use now in modern day can't be removed from water through standard water treatment procedures. So we know, particularly here in Scotland and across the rest of the UK, we know that pharmaceuticals are having a big impact on the quality of our water. And that's one of the reasons why some of our rivers are failing to achieve what is known as good ecological status under the European Union's Water Framework Directive. So the NHS Highland have decided to implement the standard and work in partnership with a whole range of stakeholders to try and improve the water quality in their catchment, and to get certified against the AWS standard to enable them to share their experience around improving their water use and reducing their impact on water, and also to try and encourage others to do the same. And some of the stakeholders that they're working with include the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, as well as our main water provider, Scottish Water. They're working with a number of research groups and think tanks, including the University of the Highlands and Islands. And they're also working with an environmental research institute as well. All of this is focused on improving water quality and tackling a quality issue, whereas the example in Peru was really around the availability of water and protecting some groundwater reserves. The final example I'm going to share with you is Renmark Irrigation Trust, who have just recently been certified against the AWS standard. Renmark is in South Australia, and they became the first agricultural collective to receive gold certification earlier this year. The trust is a fairly large collective. They serve over 600 irrigators who cover more than 4,500 hectares between them. And the water that they provide to these irrigators is pumped through 140 kilometers of pipeline. And the water that they send round through these pipes is metered at both the point where it's taken from the river and where it's then given away at the farm gate to the irrigators. This approach has received a lot of support from various organisations within the Australian government, and they've really praised AWS certification and the lead that Renmark Irrigation Trust has demonstrated as a strong positive approach to improving sustainable water management in Australia, and it's one that they have high hopes will be replicated elsewhere. And as they went through the certification process, it became clear that there was some good practice being undertaken by Renmark Irrigation Trust. Some of this was around their own systems and their own sites. So they were able to demonstrate a really high level of delivery efficiency, higher than some of the other agricultural providers in the area. But it also enabled them to work with some of the other stakeholders in their catchment to do things like come together to try and improve a particular creek that was in a bad state that they wanted to make sure was protected and enhanced going forward. So they've done a number of both site and catchment level actions as part of their certification against the AWS standard. So that's me. I'm going to come out of the presentation now and stop sharing my screen so that I can see everyone again, and hand back over to Pablo, who I think is going to take questions from some of you, if anyone has any questions, but also very happy to discuss this in more detail with you at a later date once you've had a chance to digest the information as well.
Okay, so the first question is, what do you think about the standard maximum values for some toxic isotopic concentration, such as or F, just such as S or F? I mean, I think it is very difficult to fix a standard value considering that each country and each place has different problems.
Okay, thank you. Good question.
Okay, so the first question
I'm hearing a bit of an echo, so hopefully everyone can still hear me. The criteria and the indicators within the standard are globally applicable, but they require you to adhere to locally specific standards and indicators. So the standard itself doesn't set an indicator that you should adhere to or a priority that you should follow. It requires you to look at the challenges within your own catchment, whether that be pollution related or water quantity related, and it enables you to look at what the standard should be at in your local area, and it then encourages you to react based on that context rather than a kind of global application, because of course water is different in each context, so the standard reacts to that context each time.
It requires you to look at the challenges with your own catchment, whether that be pollution related or quantity related. And it enables you to look at the strategy with your local area. I'm sorry, Sarah, it was quite difficult to listen. Can you repeat the answer?
Yes, of course. So the AWS standard includes a number of indicators and criteria that are applicable globally, but it also requires you to look at data for your own context, so in your own catchment, and react to the local problems. So the standard doesn't tell you what problem you should solve, it tells you how to identify your problems in your catchment, and takes you on a pathway to following a water stewardship approach to solving those challenges. So of course, the context for water use in each place is different every time. There is no standard that could solve all the world's water challenges in one go if it specified what actions you had to take. So instead, the AWS standard encourages you to use the relevant data that you have available to engage with your stakeholders who are also seeing those challenges, and to create a plan of action that is specific to your context and that reacts to your local need. So it can help a huge range of different users, from a dairy farmer in South America who has a pollution issue, to a cotton grower in India who has a water quantity related issue, to an office based in North America who want to get certification against the AWS standard. They would all use the same approach, but their water stewardship plan that they develop within the process of applying the standard would reflect their context and their own local needs. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
Thank you, Sarah. We have another question. How long does it take a certification process, like in average?
That's a very good question. The answer, unfortunately, is that it depends on where you are, what type of organization you are, and what kind of water challenge you're facing. Nothing with water is ever particularly quick, because it takes time to get systems in place and processes in place. Stakeholder engagement takes time, especially good stakeholder engagement. So applying the standard is not a quick process. To help give you an idea of that, we've had the standard available now for 4 years, and we are only just starting to see a real increase in the number of sites actually achieving certification. And that's because it's taken a lot of them a couple of years to get trained up in the standard, and to start the process of applying it. Because first of all, you have to gather data, and that's not always easy to come by and to find. So you have to find data to help you understand your local catchment context, and to make sure that you know all of the problems that are potentially there in your catchment for the other stakeholders as well. And then you have to engage with different stakeholders, either the public sector, your regulators, maybe your customers, other water users in the catchment, to jointly agree your plan and the actions that you're going to take. And then you have to go about implementing your plan. So it can take a little while. But what that means is that at the end of the process, once you achieve certification, what you have is a very robust plan for remedying your water risks and addressing your water challenges. And that this can be an iterative process. So as you go forward, you can build on that plan. Even after you've achieved certification, there will be things like surveillance audits to check that you are still doing what you said you were going to do, to make sure the system is as transparent and respected globally as it can be. So there is an ongoing process there. We're seeing a big increase now in the number of sites achieving certification. And I think that is testament to the fact that it took a few years for people to get started, and because it does take a year or so to implement the standard. But now we're seeing a lot more sites come online.
Thank you, Sarah. What are the difference between basic level, silver level, and gold level?
So all of the criteria and the indicators within the standard generate points for certification. So a core certification is the sort of minimum number of points you can achieve and still get certified. As you then go through the process, the more you've done against the standard, the more points you get, and the higher tiers of certification then become available to you. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but there is a basic level where you have to have done quite a lot of the standard still to get to that point, but it recognizes that this might be the first time you're implementing the standard on that site. And then the higher two levels of certification require you to go a bit beyond that. So they require you to do a little bit more. What we anticipate happening, I think, is that when a site comes to renew their certification, because the certification only lasts for a set number of years, we think that sites who have maybe initially just got core certification might choose to go for the next level up the next time they go for certification, because if they're already doing all the stuff under core, it will be much easier for them to add a few more points and get a higher level of certification.
Thank you. When some parameter is out of specification, what kind of follow-up is given to it?
Could you clarify what you mean by that one? I'm not sure I fully understood that question. Could you repeat it?
Thank you. When some parameter is out of specification, what kind of follow-up is given to it? Could you clarify what you mean by that? Not sure I fully understood that question. Could you repeat it? Thank you. When some parameter is out of specification, what kind of follow-up is given to it? While they clarify that question, I'm going to ask you another one.
Mm-hmm.
What markets could ask for this certificate in the future?
Oh, good question. It's really open to all sorts of markets. So we are working towards having a certification mark that could go on products, a bit like when you see FSC certified timber or fair trade mark on products or Rainforest Alliance. But obviously with water, that needs to be quite carefully controlled, and it needs to have good transparent traceability throughout the supply chain for that product. So at the moment, that idea is still in development, and it's being discussed by our technical committee and worked on much more. But the good thing about the AWS standard is that it's really open to any sector to use. So there could be all sorts of different markets for it. We know that some retailers are using tools like WWF's water risk filter to assess their supply chains globally, to identify where they have products in their supply chains that are sourced from areas with high water risk. And they're then using the AWS standard as a way to minimize that risk. So for some industries, particularly agricultural ones, there could be a drive from that side of the market. If you're producing something in an area facing a particular water challenge, you could be encouraged to use the standard to help mitigate those challenges. It's also been used in things like the pulp and paper industry, mining and minerals. Textiles is another area, and microelectronics They're all using the standard in different ways. We have some industrial sites in countries such as China who are collectively using the standard at an industrial park level to improve their water management, particularly around some of their pollution challenges. And we've got an example of a municipality in China who are offering an incentive to businesses to achieve AWS certification, because that municipality sees it as a good way of reducing the pollution problems that they're having, and they want more businesses to do it. So they're actually trying to support that. So there's all sorts of different markets out there for using the standard across different geographies, different sectors, and for different audiences as well.
Okay, so we are going again with the question about when you find a parameter such as an organic pollutant with levels higher that it's allowed, is monitored, or what kind of follow-up is given to it?
Okay, so I think in this case, there would need to be adherence to the regulations on that site in order for it to achieve AWS certification. So if something is shown to be higher than the allowed parameter, that would need to be remedied in order for the site to achieve certification. And as part of the water stewardship plan, there should then be something in place to monitor that going forward and make sure that that issue is under control. Obviously, it's not always something that's within one particular site's opportunity to control and to fix. And that's where the need for kind of catchment level coordinated action comes in. Hopefully that helps answer that one.
Okay, thank you. And do you have an idea of how many mineral water companies in the world have an international certification?
If I'm understanding that one correctly, at the moment, Nestle Waters are the ones who have made the commitment to use our standard in globally. But we also know that there are other standards out there that have water within them, although they won't be water stewardship specific standards. So there might be other mineral water companies using different standards at the moment, but ours is the one that kind of focuses on a water stewardship approach and adherence to that globally recognized best practice, and that is governed by the ISEAL Alliance that I mentioned earlier. We do have other bottled drinks companies within our membership who are using the standard in different ways. And some of them are using it differently in different regions. So it's hard to say globally what the answer to that is, but it's very different in different places. So we're seeing lots of different uses coming through and different approaches. But certainly the bottled drinks world is one where we're seeing growing interest in this kind of certification.
Okay, thank you. So there are no any other questions. So thank you
Okay.
very much, Sara.
Thank you, everyone.
Now that the microphone is on, I'll repeat that we are very grateful to Sara for her presentation. We hope she has a nice holiday in South America next week. Meanwhile, we will have conversations in order to design our approach to this topic. And we will come back to you, Sara, when you return to work in some weeks, hopefully speaking even better Spanish than you does now. So thank you very much. And bueno, para la gente de acá, vamos a estar probablemente invitándolos a alguna reunión de seguimiento para tratar este tema y ver cuáles son las oportunidades para nosotros como centro y para los miembros de participar de avanzar en este camino que muy bien puede ser una respuesta inteligente a intentar mejores niveles de coordinación, de entendimiento, y de acciones conjuntas vinculadas a trabajar por la calidad del agua en el Uruguay. Muchas gracias a todos por escucharnos, de los que participaron las slides, de modo que también puedan manejar ese material si lo quieren distribuir. Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos y nos estamos reencontrando en cualquier momento, ya sea por acá o físicamente. Chau, chau.